When I was running for president, my great fear was that you'd get to Washington and not be able to get anything done. So I was looking for structural changes you could make that would actually enable you to get something done. Because the dark thing is that the folks in Washington, in my mind, are not really getting rewarded for getting things done anymore. They're getting rewarded for accruing resources, making the moat nice and deep and wide so no one can challenge them, and avoiding any headline-making scandal. Like that, those seem to be like the main incentives. And if you do those things, then you'll be fine. You'll get to stay in DC. And what happens to the people is not actually tied to your fate. So I was looking for ways that we could change that up. One thing I'm passionate about, which I'd imagine it's a little further afield, but it goes back to the media element, is that I was staggered by the lack of measurement and discipline around the conversation we're having about various things, where you say, hey, is this working? Is this good? Is this not good? And then it's literally just an argument. It's like, like, this was great. No, it's terrible. And you're like, okay, like what happened there? It's like you just like look around and be like, well, is it working? Like to me, some of the things that got me to run were the fact that like we're spending twice as much as on our healthcare to worse results in other countries. Well, that doesn't seem to be like very effective. Or our life expectancy is declining, or drug overdoses have surged to record levels, or like things that objectively you look at and say, well, these are not signs of a healthy society. There are all of these things around democracy reform too. My great fear, Lawrence, is that the parties, and this is an author named Philip Howard said this, is that the parties will just play you lose, I lose, you lose, I lose over and over again while like our towns sink into the ground. like the feedback mechanism between our lives and our leaders, fortunes, like the link has been severed, and so now it doesn't matter. And then more and more people, as their lives disintegrate, will then give up hope, not vote, not participate, not donate $20 because they just don't believe that the system's designed to care about them.
And they're right. I mean, there is an important, powerful group in America who benefit if the government does nothing. And they want the government to do nothing. And the easiest thing to get in Washington is to stop the government from doing something. So doing nothing is extraordinarily profitable to a huge class of lobbyists and people in the private sector. And they win because we've built, already we inherited a constitutional design with checks and balances that made it extremely hard to get anything done. Francis Fukuyama's work about the vetocracy, which is what we've got right now, where it's so simple to veto any substantive change, means that we basically are stalemated. We can't do anything. And so if we're stalemated, there's no climate change legislation. The healthcare industry can continue to charge whatever it wants for whatever it serves. Pharmaceuticals get to do whatever they want. There's all of these public goods that we need some way to address. We can't address.
Can do anything.
Big tech. Yeah. And all of that is not accidental. It's because we've allowed the system to become one where if you're powerful, you can always block something. And so what we need is a system where that's no longer true. And one way to make that happen is to cut the incentive connection by making it so congressmen are not worried about what, the Jeff Bezos equivalents want. They're worried about what their ordinary citizens want. So if they go home and their citizens say, where is the healthcare that's affordable? And they know that that's what matters to them, raising money and getting elected, then they'll be responsive to it. It's not rocket science. It's about getting the right incentives into the system.
Everyone has negative power. You're right, Lawrence. Like that, and our system is designed for inertia. Congressman came to me, or I came to him, and he said to me when he arrived in D.C., he said, "It's like the marble columns are there to remind you that nothing will change." Yeah. And so we have this unfortunate kind of mini drama of like rising and falling while nothing fundamental gets fixed and nothing fundamental changes. And there are extraordinarily wealthy and powerful corporations that just benefit from nothing big changing.
Yeah. And yet we find a way to get ourselves worked up and angry about every kind of issue without focusing on the fact that there's no capacity to basically steer, the ship. So we're arguing on the deck about what we're eating for dinner without thinking about the fact that still we can't steer the ship, and the ship is eventually, going to run aground. And this year, 2020, has been as close to running in the ground as I could have imagined. I just read an article about Europeans looking at the United States and saying, as we imagine 300,000 Americans dying from this pandemic, the huge proportion of which caused by our own governmental ineptitude. And this article was about Europeans looking at us saying, we just can't believe it. Is there no recognition of the cost in humanity? Humanity forward, for God's sake, right? The absolute human costs that have been suffered because of this ineptitude and a willingness to do something about it. Yet here we are still wondering whether this man will be reelected, or whether the election will be so marred with corruption and ineptitude that he has a capacity to stay in power, even though I can't believe the majority of Americans would want this man to be their president.
It's a heartbreaking, devastating time. I'm sure people around the world are looking at America in disbelief. And for me, I have family members who left this country to go to other places that had managed COVID better, where they can live normal lives, and their friends who are in other countries who aren't coming back. One, I think, because they might not be allowed to come back, but two, they're like, hey, my kids can walk around outside here in a way that or we can go to restaurants more appropriately because we can go outside.
Yeah.
Here. It's a tragic, terrible time. And when you talk about no one steering the ship, run aground, I mean, this is it. We have taken the ship and crashed into shore, and hundreds of thousands are dying. Millions, tens of millions will be out of work. We can't agree on cash relief. The only hope I have is that the pendulum will swing dramatically when we're in position to try and rebuild the country. Certainly, your ideas are so core and key. You definitely moved democracy reform up for me from wherever it was to something like 1A or 2 after universal basic income, because obviously I'm like the universal basic income guy. You and I can alternate. But the thing that I love, Lawrence, is that you ran on your heart and your values in 2015, 2016, and then if everything goes well, you may get a lot of your vision accomplished 5 years later, if HR 1 passes. And I ran on universal basic income, and hopefully it will not take 5 years for us to pass it, because I don't think we have 5 years. I might have thought we had 5 years a number of months ago, but now we don't have 5 weeks. I mean, we need to make big moves.
Well, I think we should recognize our party is going to be tested. I think there's a really good chance that we take control of Congress and the presidency, and then we'll see who our party really is. Because one part of the party, the part that I want to believe in, is the reformer part, the part that says ideas like UBI, ideas like fundamental democracy reform is what the party stands for. Let's do it. Let's just make it happen. And they say it will happen. But there's another part of the party that I think is still stuck in the old ways. And they say, well, public funding for campaigns, who knows whether that will really work. Let's just, have more transparency, or like tiny little tittles on the corners of nothing. And I really fear that if we take over and the Democrats don't go through with these fundamental reforms, then we really will be in a catastrophe. So it's bad enough right now, given the disaster for the president and the control of the Senate, that we don't have these changes. But if we actually gain control of Congress and they don't deliver then I think it's time to talk about the next stage in this revolution, because obviously the ordinary democratic process has not worked.
I agree. There is a need and a challenge for the Democratic Party to go big and solve some of these meaningful structural problems so that Americans can see that they're not just crouching there and making some window dressing marginal actions and they don't recognize it. I fear, because some of them have been there for a long time and their lives are very, very disconnected from the lives of most everyday Americans at this point. But that they need to rise to the challenge in a very, very big way. We need to, if you include the two of us. Like, we're the reform element. The Democratic Party hopefully is the vessel for that reform. But if it is not, oh my gosh, will there end up being like a whole massive collision. Hopefully that need is clear to them.
Yeah, because if they don't deliver, I mean, then we're going to have another podcast and talk about what the next structure is, because it's not going to be this party.
I agree with you, Lawrence. Let's put a pin in that. We'll check back in a little while and see whether HR 1's passed, whether the party's rising the challenge. But this conversation has been awesome and edifying. I learned so much from you. And your ideas are vital to the future of our country. We need to make them a reality as soon as possible. And I appreciate your patriotism and service by stepping up 5 years ago and helping show me and many others the light. Seriously, like I donated. I was like, this guy's a genius and correct. And he's highlighting something that most of us are not thinking enough about.
I appreciate it, Andrew. And thank you so much for running. You were such an inspiration to so many great people. And you brought them back. You brought them into politics. And that was the most important contribution you could make.
Oh, thank you. That means so much to me. Were your kids Yang Gang? Was that?
Yeah. That's
yes. That's all I wanted.
My oldest was a little surprised that I knew Andrew Yang. I told him, and he said, "No, come on, you don't know Andrew Yang." I said, "Yeah."
Oh, you can prove it to him. You can be like, "Check this out. Me and Andrew Yang are both like this," which we are. I mean, I feel grateful to know you, and I'll continue to pick your brain and learn from you every step of the way.
Great, me too. Great to talk to you, Andrew.
You too. Be well, Lawrence. All the best to the family. Thank you for listening in. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. If you did, please do subscribe to Yang Speaks and click on notifications so we can let you know every time we have a new episode.